And so we're going to have a wonderful time. We know that Thursday was Thanksgiving here in America. And Thanksgiving speaks of many things to many people. It is for many people, most of us, a day off from work. It is a time to watch the parades. It is eating turkey. It is watching 3 football games. All of those things is getting ready for Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever the case might be. But that's really not the ultimate purpose of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is reflecting on the blessing of God in your life. How many of you are grateful for His blessing? And with that, it is giving thanks to God for His goodness, His salvation in your life. I want to look at a passage today that talks about being thankful. How many of you know we're living at a time where an entire generation has been raised to hate their country? And yet America, the United States I should say, America is bigger than the U.S., is in my opinion the greatest country there has ever been. And if you only talk to some people, you'll hear about how we're racist or this or that. But I want to let you know, if you travel the world, every time we come back to the U.S., we want to kiss the ground. There is nothing like it. Is it perfect? No. Is it a wonderful country? Yes. Because I believe God birthed it and gave us the privileges that we have. Now, we want to take a look at Luke chapter number 17. Very interesting passage. And it's talking about the ministry of Jesus. And it says, verse 11, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance. Notice that. They stood at a distance and lifted up their voices. Now, why did they lift up their voices? Because they were far away. They wanted Jesus to hear them. They wanted his attention. And so they said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourself to the priests. Now, obviously, Jesus could recognize these individuals as lepers. And leprosy was absolutely a horrible disease. And so Jesus knew exactly what they said when they said, have mercy on us. They were looking for healing. Now, what's interesting, he didn't say, be healed. He did not speak a prayer over them. He simply said, go and show yourself to the priests. And there's a reason for that. In Leviticus, chapters 13 and 14, there are explanations of what leprosy is, what to do about it, and how to get back into society. Because if you were a leper, you were an outcast. You had to cry when you were around people, unclean, unclean. And so that's basically what they were doing. They were far away because they had to be. And then if you were going to have a clean bill of health, you had to go and show yourself to the priests. I'm so glad I don't have to do that. There's a lot of things I do as a pastor, but no one comes with leprosy and says, can you check me out? Am I good now? So the Bible says, as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And Jesus said to him, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Now, leprosy was a dreaded, horrible disease in Bible days. Today, it is often called Hansen's disease, but it was one of the most terrible diseases of all times. Listen to this. First, a patch of skin becomes discolored and numb, usually somewhere on the face. From there, the patch may spread and grow into thick, glossy, tumor-like welts. Next, the disease advances to the hands and the feet. The fingers and toes commonly shrink and lose their usefulness. As the external tumors grow, they leak and discharge a very unpleasant odor. Finally, the disease will work internally, affecting the voice box. Slowly, inch by inch, the victim dies over a span of 10 to 20 years. What a horrible disease. So the leper was banned from his community and from the temple. He was compelled to leave his home and friends to dwell in a special area set apart exclusively for lepers. Those would be called leper colonies. There was no cure for leprosy in Jesus' day. There was no cure. Now, today there is a cure, but there was not at that time. Remember one time Jesus said, talking to others, many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So recovery from leprosy was almost unheard of at that time. Again, lepers were required to keep their distance. That's why they stood afar off. They were isolated and lived in leper colonies. And again, they were considered unclean. Jesus said again, go and show yourself to the priests. He didn't even pray for the lepers. He simply told them to show themselves to the priests and to obey the rules of restoration given in Leviticus 14. Now, the priests acted like a health inspector. They would inspect the body. Only if it was announced by the priest that the leper was healed could they return to their family and society. And so they were given that word, go and show yourself to the priests. And the Bible says, as they went, they were cleansed. So there was something they had to do. Listen to this. Sometimes our miracle or our breakthrough comes in our act of obedience. Hold back your enthusiasm on that one. Sometimes our miracle or our breakthrough comes in an act of obedience. So as they went without seeing any change, the Bible says they were cleansed. Now, look at verse 15 again. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his feet, on his face at Jesus' feet, giving Jesus thanks. Now, we know something about this particular man. He was a Samaritan. Now, we hear a lot in the Bible about the Samaritans, but a lot of people don't understand exactly who they were. Realize this, the Jews hated the Samaritans. They were a mixed race, part Jew and part Gentile. They had their own temple. They had their own religious services on Mount Gerizim. In fact, in John 8:48, when Jesus' enemies wanted to insult him, they called him a Samaritan. So Samaritans were not regarded by the Jewish people. But Jesus said in verse 17, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give God praise except this foreigner? And Jesus said, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Now, this seems to imply that the other lepers may have been Jewish, because Jesus said, was the only one that gave God praise this foreigner? Jesus showed disappointment over their lack of thankfulness and gratitude. Now, it's interesting because this man who was healed began by standing at a distance, far away from Jesus. But he ended by falling on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Only one of the 10 lepers who were healed came back to thank Jesus. Now, too often, we enjoy the gift, but we forget the giver. We are quick to pray, but slow to praise. And that can just be human nature. I know even those that often get government help or assistance or blessings from churches seldom say thank you. There can be that sense of entitlement. But we need to be a people that is grateful for the grace of God in our lives. Not one of us is here saved today by anything we have done. As one minister said, the only thing that we give God when it comes to our salvation is our sin. But He gives us His grace. He extends the scepter of forgiveness, and we are born again. We have so much to be grateful for in this life as a believer and in this land of the United States. Now, it's interesting because one translation says, your faith has made you well. That speaks of healing. But the margin of my Bible, the ESV, says your faith has saved you. That speaks of your salvation. And another translation puts them together. Your faith has healed and saved you. Both healing and salvation was His. You see, the Samaritan's 9 friends were declared clean by the priest. They were healed. But he was declared saved by the Son of God. He was saved as well. I'm grateful for healing, but you can be healed and still miss heaven. You have to be born again. You have to be saved. And this man's thankfulness, gratitude, appreciation didn't just save him or heal him, it saved him from his sins. Now, when you think about Christmas time and you think about Santa Claus, what do we normally give Santa? I'm not you, but what do kids give him? They give him their to-do list. Or this is what I want. Santa, I want this and that and the other. And that's basically what he's there for. He's just there to say, these are the gifts I need for this year, and this is what I need you to do. And if we're not careful, we can have that idea even in regards to the Lord. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking God for things. He delights in blessing us. But listen to this. Prayer is first and foremost fellowship with the Father. It's communion with Him. When God made Adam and Eve, He would come down at the cool of the day to fellowship with them. I don't know whether the cool of the day was the morning or the evening, but somewhere in your life you need the cool of the day where you get away from everything else and just fellowship with Him. Now, there's a time to say, Lord, these are my needs, and I'm believing for that. But it doesn't start there. It starts, our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. I magnify you. I worship you. I fellowship with you. So prayer is first and foremost fellowship with Him, not just giving Him a shopping list of things that we need. Again, that's not wrong, but that's not ultimately the purpose of prayer. Now, we should not bring a request to God without thanksgiving. Psalm 95, verse number 2, let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. So that's the prescribed way. Why do we start church with worship? Well, not just until people come and are in place. No, that's not the purpose. The purpose is we enter into his gates, into his presence with thanksgiving. And no matter what your day's been like, no matter what you're believing for, there's always a reason to be grateful. Now, let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Now, in Psalm 100, we have the divine pattern for entering God's presence. We begin with a spirit of thanksgiving, an attitude of gratitude. Psalm 100, verse 4, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name. So verse 4 describes what we do. We come into God's presence with thanksgiving. But in verse 5, it tells us why we do it. And that's because of who God is. Verse 5 begins with the word for. For. In other words, because of the following, this is why you're thankful. The Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness is to all generations. I call these the three eternal truths. They never change. They're always the same to each generation. The Lord is good. His mercy endures forever, and his truth endures to all generations. Now, I want to look at another passage briefly that talks about some of the characteristics of the last days. How many of you believe we're living in the last days? I do. I don't know how long we have before Jesus returns, but I've seen so much change in my 63 years. It's unbelievable how many things have changed. And we're seeing these various verses come to pass in our lives. So in 2 Timothy 3, Paul gives around 18 different descriptions of what the last days is like. And the last days began on the day of Pentecost, but they continue until Jesus returns. So let's take a look at verse number 1 of 2 Timothy 3. Paul said this, but know this. If he said, but know this, we should know it. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. How many of you believe that we are living in perilous times? I do. And that word perilous in the margin of my Bible says this, times of stress. Know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, times of stress. And then it says, for men or people will be lovers of themselves. Do we ever see that? Lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. What's the next word? Unthankful, unholy. Unthankful. Now, the word unthankful means to be ungrateful or thankless. And it's one of the characteristics of the last days. Many will be unthankful. Now, the good news is many is not all. Those who know Jesus have so much to be thankful for, so much to be grateful for. But again, in the last days, many will be unthankful. Rick Renner is a brilliant scholar, and many times he will take a passage from the Greek language and he will expand it, kind of like the Amplified Bible. He does that with this particular verse, and this is how he translates this. Although they were once thankful and appreciative, people will become void of gratitude and generally unappreciative of everything in the last days. Now, that doesn't mean that's the believer, but many in the world have an idea, the world owes me something. I need these things. I'm not grateful unless I have the newest iPhone or the coolest this, or whatever the case might be. And again, I'll read that. Although many were once thankful and appreciative, people will become void of gratitude and generally unappreciative of everything in the last days or the last times. Even Romans 1 talks about that. The ungodly knew God, verse 21, but they would not worship him as God or even give him thanks. Now notice the result. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. And as a result, their minds became dark and confused. Do we see that in politics today? Confusion and darkness. Why? We're not giving God thanks for his great blessings. So Rick Renner said this: thankfulness is a prerequisite to happiness. If you're never thankful, you're probably not happy very often. Thankfulness is a prerequisite to happiness, because only a thankful heart can be a happy heart. That's good. Now, if thankfulness is a prerequisite to happiness, Graham Cook, another great preacher, said this: complaining is the language of hell. Ouch. Complaining is the language of hell. I guess that means that thanksgiving is the language of heaven. So we can have one of two languages: the language of heaven, that's thanksgiving, or the language of hell, and that's complaining. I choose the first, not the second. You know, most of you know, all of you know, that my mom passed away in late August. And it was an absolute shock to me. I was with her the night before. She was my best friend and my barber. And she also would help with food when Pastor Stephanie was away. And I didn't ask her to do that, but she, that's what moms do. And so I was with her right the night before she passed away, and she cut my hair, and she made me dinner. And we talked a little bit, and then she actually made me 2 meals for the next day because Pastor Stephanie was away. And I left about 9:15 or so, and then she had a phone call where she helped lead a prayer meeting for Women's Aglow, where she did all over the nation. Several hundred people would be on that call, and she prayed from 10 to 11. And then afterwards, she called one of the people and talked to them. And then she went to bed probably about midnight. She would stay up late. She woke up the next morning and texted someone, and then 2 hours later, she was in glory. And it just rocked my world. And all of us, Pastor Stephanie felt the same way. I mean, it was a devastating loss because she was feeling great. She was ready to teach an end times teaching on the book of Revelation. She studied all summer for it. Alexander had gone in to check on her. He was going to do some work there and found her on the ground, and she was already in glory. And to say I was shocked was an understatement. We were just absolutely shocked. And obviously, when it comes to grief, that is a process, and you've got to work through that. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in Brazil, and we had an amazing conference, and the presence of God was so strong. And I was trying to get into the meetings, but I was dealing with a spirit of grief. And grief is natural, it's healthy, it's normal, but a spirit of grief makes it so that you feel like you can't move forward. You're just living in the past. This heaviness was over me. I had to preach in a day or two, and I just felt like this was sitting on my shoulders and I could not enter in. So there was a lot of ministry going on, and there was an African brother that was there that was just so precious, powerful prayer warrior. And so I called him over to me and I said, brother, do me a favor. I'm dealing with a spirit of grief. And I said, I know grief is normal and natural, but this is beyond that. This is just a heaviness I cannot overcome. And so he just came over to me. He was taller than me. Of course, everyone is. And he laid hands upon me, and he's praying heaven down. And I could feel that spirit of grief break off of me. And I've never had that since. Now, I've had grief, but not that overwhelming sense of hopelessness. In fact, the first Sunday I preached, I thought, how do I do that? My mother was my cheerleader. If I wasn't wild about my sermon, I would call her, because it was always a you hit the ball out of the park sermon, you know. That's what moms do, right? And so I remember